We're just a little less than a month away from the scheduled start of the 2020 NFL season, and we're just past the opt-out deadline for players who don't want to play this year. 67 players, by the way, are sitting out this season. The Denver Broncos are no exception to the changes 2020 is bringing, of course. I want to bring in Michael Spencer from CBS Denver to talk about the upcoming season and some of the inevitable changes that we're seeing. How's it going, Michael?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, so let's start with Juwan James opting out. How does that affect the outlook for the offensive line protecting Drew Lock?
It's going to have a big impact on this team. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, he's a guy who they thought was going to be their starting right tackle. Now, they thought he was going to be the starting right tackle all of last year too, and he was limited to less than 70 snaps, I think it was, because of injuries. So they've been able to play without Juwan James before, but they went into the season and went into the draft and all offseason thinking that they had solidified their offensive line with the selections of Lloyd Cushenberry at center and Graham Glasgow. And now to lose a guy in Juwan James who you thought was going to be a starter on that offensive line, that's going to be detrimental. I don't think there's any doubt about that, especially when you consider that they're trying to protect a young quarterback in Drew Lock, trying to build these offensive weapons that Lock has around him. So it's going to be a big loss for this Broncos offensive line moving forward, because the offensive line has been the bugaboo for this team for the last several years, and you feel like they were on the verge of getting it solidified, and now they lose the guy who they thought was going to be their starting right tackle.
Well, not to mention other changes they're experiencing this year because teams won't get any preseason scrimmages this season. And how is that going to affect the Broncos?
It's going to affect them a lot because you're looking at a guy in Drew Lock who's only played 5 games as a starting quarterback. He's now got 2 new starting wide receivers around him. We mentioned the offensive line. They've also got Melvin Gordon, who's now their new running back, who I think will get the majority of the reps. So they'll obviously split them with Philip Lindsay, but they've also got a new offensive coordinator, right? So you're looking at young guys, new guys who could use those preseason games to really kind of develop a little bit and maybe get some chemistry going. And I think what you're going to see around the league is that it's going to be ugly for the first couple of regular season games, especially for the Broncos offense. I look at this Broncos offense and I think that 2021 is going to be the year when they take the big leap, right? Because they've missed out on OTAs. They've missed out on a good bulk of training camp. They're going to miss out on all of the preseason. So it's going to be difficult for this team to come in and click right away.
And you guys haven't even had a chance to see the team in person yet, right?
Yeah, they won't have their first official training camp practice until later this week.
Gotcha. So, Michael, what can you tell us about the key storylines for the Broncos training camp?
Well, I think everybody's going to be watching the running backs because they're going to want to see how things develop with Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay. And, of course, for those of us here in Denver, Philip Lindsay's the hometown kid, and so he's become a huge fan favorite. And so people are going to be interested to see how they make that dynamic work. I think they're going to be interested to see what they do along that offensive line. And then defensively, can this group in its second year under Vic Fangio take another big step? And what we have continued to hear from guys on the defensive side of the ball, from John Elway and from Vic Fangio himself, is that in year 2 under Fangio calling the plays in his defense, they're supposed to be a lot better, and the Broncos are counting on that. So that's going to be hard to tell in training camp, but that's going to be something that we're watching and seeing how they develop and whether or not that development can translate into the regular season games when they start right now on September 14th for the Broncos.
And Drew Lock is entering his first full year as starting quarterback. Based on his performance, I guess, towards the end of the season last year, what are your expectations for him this year?
The Broncos are expecting big things, and I think everybody around the NFL is expecting big things from Drew Lock, and I know that Drew's expecting big things of himself as well. So the key thing for Drew is going to be, now there's tape, right? Now it's out there as to what he likes to do. So defensive coordinators are going to be able to watch that and have film of him in an NFL game. You also wonder how he can connect with this offense and how quickly he can really pick that up. It's one thing to have Zoom meetings. It's one thing to draw it up on the board. It's another to put it into play against a defense, you know? And so I think that's going to be really interesting. But the Broncos have made no bones about it. They're all in on Drew Lock. They made that obvious with their moves in the draft. They made that obvious with their moves in free agency. So they feel like he can be the future. And now it's really up to Drew to be able to take the reins and prove them right.
Finally, do you expect the Broncos this year to improve on last year's 7-9 record?
I do. I think given everything that we've talked about, it feels like they are going to be better. And now that there's an opportunity for them to sneak into the playoffs, I really think that if they don't make the playoffs, it's going to be a disappointment. I think that the way things have shaped up here the last couple of years, the way things are trending on the offensive side of the ball, and that defense being in a second year, I think that if they don't make the playoffs, it's going to be a huge disappointment, more so than it has been over the last couple of seasons.
I think that's the news that everybody in Denver wanted to hear. Thank you so much, Michael, for spending some time with me today and discussing all things about the upcoming NFL season. The Broncos are expected to play their first game of the 2020 season at home against the Titans. Game is scheduled for September 14th. Katie Johnston for CBSDenver.com.